All right, welcome everyone. This is Daniel's day off. He's often here, but he has Thursday's day off. So it's me, you get me instead. Stefan, are you okay with driving the agenda? I know you had one big item for it, at least. Yeah, let me put that in the agenda.
I would like to discuss the proposal that I made for moving Flagger from WeWorks organization into Flux Dev and, of course, CNCF, and what that implies to Flux community and Flagger users.
Yep, cool. And there's another thing in there, so let's just make sure we have some time for that as well. I'm sure we will do.
What?
Sorry, there's another item in the agenda. I just want to make sure that we cover that as well.
Which one? The chart? Or
Yeah.
what is...
Would you rather have a look at that first?
I just ran into that this morning. It looks like a super trivial bug. I just wanted to check whether people were okay with fixing bugs still in V1.
Got it. Okay, I'll tell you what, I will have a look at it.
I'll throw up a PR. Don't bother looking at it until.
Okay. Yeah, regarding V1, we are trying to fix kind of blocker bugs and security stuff. Don't always get to things because there's just a mountain of stuff to do on Flux V2 as well, and there are relatively few of us. But I can certainly commit to having a look at a PR.
Okay.
Yeah, if you make that PR, can you also bump Flux version? Because we've released Flux 121, I think, but there is no, it's not being bumped in the chart.
Oh, is it not? Okay.
I'm not totally familiar with the release process bits of that. Let me start by just fixing the chart bug.
Yep, do that.
So
okay.
Can we talk about the proposal? Or?
Yes, go ahead, Stefan.
Cool. So I've pasted in chat here the link to the issue. I've talked to Takeshi, which is a maintainer for Flagger like me, and we both agreed that moving Flagger into Flux organization will bring Flagger to the next level, let's say. The idea will be for Flagger to become at some point a specialized controller in the GitOps toolkit that will deal with advanced deployment patterns like canaries, A/B testing, blue-green, traffic mirroring, and so on. Of course, all these things cannot be achieved with Kubernetes alone. So I'm not quite convinced how we can integrate it into Flux CLI, because it's not just about deploying Flagger. You also have to have, I don't know, Istio upmesh, Linkerd, or some ingress controller that has an API that's compatible with what Flagger is doing. But on the long run, the idea is to break Flagger apart, like we did with Flux version 1, rewrite it with controller runtime libraries, remove from Flagger things around alerting, Slack channels, all that thing, and reuse the Flux notification controller. I don't know if current Flagger users are happy with that, but that's my plan. I've seen some concern on Twitter around, hey, if Flagger moves into Flux CD, can I use Flagger standalone? Do I have to install Flux and stuff like that? I think the answer for now is yes. You'll be able to use Flagger as a standalone component in the foreseeable future, but once Flagger is, I don't know, Flagger 2 or however you want to call it, it will probably lose the capability of sending alerts on its own. That's the only thing I envision, like what it will get dropped from Flagger. That's it. Anything else, it will work the same. Immediate problems after we move it, Flagger end-to-end test will no longer work. So how Flagger end-to-end tests are being done right now, we use a paid account on Circle CI. It needs 7 beefed up VMs, all running in parallel, because we need to spin up a service mesh, a different service mesh, a different ingress controller on each VM. We install their Kubernetes kind and we do all things. CNCF is no longer sponsoring Circle CI accounts. So we need to move from Circle CI to GitHub Actions, the whole Flagger end-to-end test, and it's quite a lot. From all the projects I've worked on, Flagger end-to-end tests are really complex. So that's my main concern right now. If you are moving it, people open pull requests to fix something or to add a feature, and we will not be able to test it unless I spend my time on rewriting the end-to-end tests and not work on Flux or any other Flagger feature. So that's the trade-off for now. In terms of licensing, packages, and all the other things, Flagger is licensed Apache 2.0. Weaveworks agreed to donate its copyright to CNCF. I see no issues whatsoever in there. Any questions or concerns about what I said? I guess not.
How much time do you expect it to take to move the end-to-end tests?
So I did that for Flux 1, version 1. It took me roughly a week. It should be faster now because I kind of know what things will break when you move the scripts from running in Circle CI to running in GitHub Actions. But yeah, Flagger end-to-end, Flux end-to-end tests are very light. There is no load balancer type. You don't need any kind of, networking running there. Just the basic CNI with what kind comes. While Flagger is all about layer 7 and all that stuff, NTLS between workload and so on. So in theory, should take, I don't know, 3 days, but depending on what fails. And I don't know what everyone else experience with CI is, but every time I touch CI, it's like the most horrible thing ever. Like, okay, GitHub Actions are awesome, but in terms of debugging, I feel like they are way inferior than Circle CI. On Circle CI, you have a debug mode where you can SSH into the VM as root, and you can do whatever you want. You can rerun your tests, whatever. GitHub Actions has no such thing. Another thing that annoys me really, really bad on GitHub Actions, the moment you rerun a job, it deletes the previous run. So you lose everything. Once you run something, your logs, everything else is lost. So now after I run a job, I save all the logs, everything to my local computer, then I click rerun. So yeah, GitHub Actions is way inferior in terms of debugging to Circle CI, but yeah, if CNCF doesn't pay for that, I have to move it.
Do you expect it to be like you only expect it to take a week? Will it affect like the project in a bad way that you can't do features until it's fixed, or do you think that's fine?
Yeah, I think that's fine. I mean, I can explain to people opening pull requests, say, hold on until we get end-to-end test running. Flagger has some portions of the code are super critical for what it does. So, and it has unit tests all over the place. And time again, unit tests can pass with no issues. But once you run it with Istio, latest version, MTLS enabled and everything else, it fails. So I cannot click the merge button without seeing all the end-to-end tests on green. I don't trust me with that. So yeah, that's a blocker for sure. End-to-end tests are the thing that keeps Flagger alive. Flagger depends on right now on 6 different APIs, custom resource definitions coming from other parts. And like everybody knows, Service Mesh is very young. It evolves very fast. They do a bunch of releases, breaking changes, and so on. So without those end-to-end tests, for sure I will break it. So, or not only me, anyone trying to contribute something, because most contributors, when they want to add something to Flagger, they come from their own use case. Like, okay, someone recently added step weights to Flagger, and so instead of saying to Flagger, hey, I want you to progress the traffic from 5% to 50%, what that means, Flagger will add 5%, 10, 15, and so on. And this particular user want to say, I want to set my own steps, and I want to say, first you do 1%, 2%, 10%, then jump to 50%, then jump to 100%, right? So that's a change in the API. They added, he added the new field, and he was testing that. He was using Linkerd, and Linkerd doesn't have a limitation where you say total max weight 100. It can go to whatever number you want, and it does the calculation in percentage on its own. While Envoy, Istio, Nginx, anyone else, it validates that the weight has to be a maximum of 100, right? And he also wrote an end-to-end test, but of course for Linkerd, because that's what he was using, right? So if I would have merged that, everyone would have like broken Flagger deployment. So yeah, that's why end-to-end tests are critical. In terms of time frame, I don't really know when this will happen. I hope this year, but I also want to get some vacation, so we'll see. Anyway, the idea is, if you have any kind of concerns, go to these issues, comment on it, and I'll try to respond. That's the takeaway. Any concerns from the Flux maintainers? Michael, Hide?
No, I'm all for it.
Cool.
I think it's a great asset to have in Flux project.
Should we talk next about Philip's work on the...
Yeah, we can. Philip's happy to.
Yeah, I forgot to add it to the list. So if there's something else already on there, we might take that first. I haven't really checked the document, but sure, let's. If there's something else, we can talk about that. So I saw your comments there, Stefan, regarding the discussion regarding adding some sort of option. It's kind of the POC at least showed us what was missing in the Git to Go library and bindings compared to GoGit. So that was kind of good in the sense that we could see that, yeah, where the API was different and where features were missing. So it was like, yeah, the PGP key verification was kind of easy to just solve on your own. I think the two things that differ kind of between the libgit2 implementation or the Git2Go implementation and GoGit is host key verification, which for some weird reason they never implemented with the SSH known hosts callback standard in Go, even though there is. I've talked to one of the maintainers and he said that he would do a PR that would fix that. And then shallow clones, which is kind of a big thing actually. So, which means that it would do, you basically have to clone the whole repository every time. And that one really depends. It's kind of, it depends on how big your repo is. So I know that you wrote, Stefan, something about 15 gigabyte repos. I don't know how many repos we have that are 15 gigabytes that are YAML, so that you might end up with that. I don't know. Have you seen that before?
So my concern is like this. Okay, we'll offer a specific flag in the Git repository definition. So people that are using Azure DevOps, they will enable that. Once they enable it, we will be able to clone Azure DevOps repositories, but we'll get the whole history from that repo.
Mm-hmm.
And since Flux 2 is not limited to a single repo, I expect for people to use Flux 2 for their apps repos, where they will be storing, besides code, also deployment YAMLs, right? And app repos can have like huge histories,
yeah,
right? And you can get to gigabytes of data, right? If someone has committed their Node.js modules, you are done. That's half the internet there. And if they keep doing that for every release, that means you'll end up with huge repos. I don't even know if Azure DevOps supports such a thing, gigabytes of data in a repo, but I've seen it with Flux One. I mean, we had issues with people who were saying, I type Flux sync and it times out. And it turned out they had like gigabytes of data in their repos, and Flux One downloads everything. And maintains the clone. So we'll definitely get into that issue on Azure DevOps if someone links an app repo. I don't see a workaround for that.
It's just good. We can only document the limitations and make it obvious that, yeah, this is kind of, if you don't have to, don't choose V2. Yes. And hopefully, I don't know, it's gone like that whole shallow clone thing issue in libgit2 has been, apparently it's been a thing for 8 years. And the PR they have now is like 2 years old. And I like it.
Somehow, so for some reason, I remember that issue when back when I was working on consultancy, I had like huge problems with Puppet. And it turned up Puppet uses libgit too.
Yeah.
And every Puppet module that we've used had like huge history.
Yeah.
And Puppet does it in memory, so at some point we had to give Puppet like the Puppet master like 16 gigabytes of RAM or something like that, just to clone our modules. And it felt really silly. Now, when I saw the issue that old, I remember like, damn, I hit that problem with Puppet, and it haunts me.
Yeah.
Years after.
But I will be that annoying person and continue asking them like, so what's the status on this? Because it feels kind of absurd, you know, that somebody's implemented this and it's in a PR waiting for 2 years. And the test still passed. So it's like it is mergeable and somebody's approved it. It's just that somebody has to click the merge button and they don't want to do it. So that's very frustrating. But if we can have a first step where we can get a legitimate version, no hacks, that works with Azure DevOps, that's good. And I'll get that PR done this week. I was just a bit tired yesterday and writing really bad code. I actually went on kind of a detour and had looked at some other options, which might kind of help people either way, which is running some sort of transparent Git cache. There is this project called Goblet from Google that does it's like Git aware HTTP proxy, so it actually understands what you're trying to clone and goes out and fetches the hash for you and stores it locally, or the specific commit. It does not work for Azure DevOps. Because
This is GoGit.
No, so it actually uses GoGit, but not for that reason. So the reason it doesn't work is because it's actually like doing curl requests for like the GitWire protocol, and it's doing requests that Azure DevOps does not support, which is like the multi-act stuff. So I'm going in this like infinite search for tools to solve my problem and constantly finding solutions that do not work with Azure DevOps. But
this is the only service. I never heard of a service that's not compatible with Git protocol. I mean,
well, it's a very specific thing, which is like hard to implement, so nobody does it, and it requires it. But I found another Git proxy that works with Azure DevOps that shells out to Git. Yeah. But what it in theory, what it would allow you to do is avoid having to fetch the whole history, because it basically, it looks at what you're trying to clone and makes sure that it has that commit locally and then gives it to you. So that could be an option, you know, to as like a alternative of basically, okay, if you really have issues with the very big repos, you could technically run V1 with a Git aware proxy, and then you could technically also get it to work. So I've managed to get that also running with the current source controller. But I don't think it's a good solution to go, yes, use this, because it's kind of a big hack, I must say.
Yeah, and we keep the sources into places.
Yeah.
2 different storages. I mean, it's it's a workaround, but yeah, we shouldn't encourage that.
Would you use it as a sidecar?
Exactly.
Like
yeah.
Okay.
My hope is that eventually this all pays off, and when libgit2 implements shallow clones, we might just say, yeah, use Git v2, and GoGit kind of still can live there, but it maybe might not be needed as it like Git2Go would support the whole like multi-act stuff and be a bit more efficient. So
I have a couple of questions for you. One, we got some requests from Microsoft and other possible users of Flux 2 around self-signed TLS certificates. So the idea is you connect through HTTPS to, let's say, an on-prem Bitbucket instance, and that will not work with GoGit, because it will say, yeah, untrusted cert, I will not connect to it.
You can do that with Git to go.
Can we give it certs from memory without mounting them on disk?
Yes, because there is a certificate validation callback you can do in Git to go. So I think because it gives you the X509 certificate in memory. So I think that would be possible, yeah.
Okay, so maybe for that, it actually makes sense to implement Go to Git because it's not just about Azure DevOps. It's about being able to connect to sources that are self-signed certificates, which are, I think, a valid use case for many enterprises out there.
Yeah.
They issue their own certs and so on. So we should, if that works with Go to Git, I'm more excited about it.
Yeah.
than just had DevOps support. Okay.
Yeah. So if we can get some environment set up, I could probably even verify that in a PR as fast as I get my PR through. I'll just do that work also, so that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, how you can? I think we have a mock server that we inside the source controller, and we can mount there a self-signed certificate. Like so, we can issue the certificate with Go code inside the test, mount it there. Set it in the Git repository object. So in the Git repository object, we should have a secret ref to a cert, a certificate, and test it out with unit testing.
Exactly. Yeah, that's good.
We have that stuff in place.
Yeah. So the only thing I have to do is do the whole interface stuff, so you can run either or, and then I just have to verify the known host verification. So it kind of sucks that you can't use our existing known host solution because it gives you the SHA-SUM of the public key certificate from the SSH server and not the actual public key. And my understanding is it has to do with it was kind of difficult to give public key certificates in different languages from libgit 2. So they were like, yeah, did you just get the string with the SHA-SUM? And Golang wants the whole certificate. It does not like. So, but I've implemented, so it does, as long as it's the RSA, it does the known host verification. So, but it doesn't do, I don't know if the lib implementation does DSA and those standards. Do you know that?
ECDS, I think.
Yeah, there's so there's both the ECDSA and then there's normal DSA, and I'm not sure if I haven't really seen anybody use it. So the most typical known host, like fingerprint you see is RSA, and that's kind of what I can do right now. That's like the only thing really that is less good with Git to go.
Yeah, so in the end there will be like two things that will come with the C bindings. One is the ability to connect to Git v2 repository, and also deal with certs.
Yeah.
So my proposal and Michael's counter proposal in how we name that field is no longer right, because it's not only about Git protocol, it's also about TLS.
Yeah. Well, I think we should still call it V1, V2, or because it kind of
isn't it like V1, V2 is that it's not actually that.
Yeah.
Maybe you could have two things, either of which, if you set it uses libgit2 and they both have the trade-off.
Yeah.
or they have the trade-off until they don't. So if it gets shallow cloned, then that's cool. You don't have to have that trade-off. But if you still require self-signed certificates, then sorry, that's the wrong way around, isn't it? Anyway, you get what I mean. If you need the protocol to compatibility and go get that, then cool, you don't have to make that trade-off. But if you need self-signed certificates, you still need to make the trade-off. So they sort of operate independently anyway. You can't really have them behind one flag for forward compatibility.
Yeah. Well, my thought is eventually we kind of remove the flag. If libgit2 does everything that git2go does.
Sure. Yeah.
If that is like
no trade-off, then you can. I mean, you wouldn't remove it. You would just make it meaningless, effectively.
Yeah.
Although, if you're saying ignore, if you're saying allow self-signed certificate, then maybe there is still a distinction between allowing that and not allowing it.
I just see that if you have two options, I think people would be confused. Like, I don't think the majority of the end users understand the difference between git2go and go git.
Yeah.
So that they will see, oh, why am I getting these trade-offs when I'm enabling self-signed certificates, which are the same trade-offs that I get from enabling git2v2. So it's like, if we have one option saying, yeah, you're using another library, it comes with its own drawbacks and its own features, which are basically, if you're using Azure DevOps or you need self-signed certs, you have to use this, but you're basically, this is what you're losing.
Do you want to make a note about the self-signed certificates in the discussion? Because that's where the proposal and counter-proposal are as well.
Yeah. That's bad.
I should just verify self-signed certs, and if that's the case, I can link exactly where it is in my fork even. Just give me a second. I will. This whole journey has been a roller coaster for me. Here we go. So I'll put in the chat here. So this line is where you would probably implement the self-signed certificate validation, which is basically returning nil now because it doesn't really want to do anything. So, and there you have the option to basically, you get the X509 raw byte data, and then it's up to us to kind of implement the verification there.
Yeah, also another thing that we've recently discovered with Azure is the fact that so if you are doing kubectl create secret from a Windows machine, it will append a /n to all the keys. And if you create a secret to connect to a Helm repository hosted on Azure, Azure, instead of telling you 401 unauthorized access, will give you 500 server error. And I think it took us like 2 weeks to discover what the hell is going on. So yeah, if you are using Azure, be warned, check out all your secrets for the ending /n. You have to remove it from there.
So that's something we should just put in the docs. bang bang
Oh,
notify.
Yes,
whatever it is. Bang, bang,
ECR
bang.
can repos. Yeah, that's the problem. And I asked the person who found that to add an Azure Helm repo entry to our docs and explain what's going on. Yeah, you can look at the issue. It was like really funny. It was like running in the loop and it will just respawn 500 error, or it will work, or error, or work. So it doesn't always fail. Another interesting thing, like how would you return a 500 error instead of unauthorized error? Like,
I remember, I think Key or Quay.io had a similar thing at one point. I'm just trying to balance the conversation a little.
yes,
yeah,
yes, it did. Instead of
that is.
Instead of returning a rate limit error for whatever, it would return 500. So
yeah,
it's not only Azure who got the HTTP status wrong. Yeah, it's okay. But we definitely have to collect all these gotchas and document them. So
sure.
I will probably be fine. I'll probably find a couple of issues now that we're starting to run Flux V2, and that I'm guessing the whole AED podded entity in combination with things like the Helm controller is probably going to show a couple of issues that we usually see with people not implementing support for like environmental authentication. So I'm guessing I'll have to go in and fix those types of things. Those are kind of easy when you know what you're looking for.
Yeah, we also should validate that Azure Vault actually works, because I'm not convinced it does.
Yeah. You mean for SOP?
Yes, for decryption.
Yeah.
So today someone sorted out how to get SOPs working with AWS KMS. And AWS does a thing where if you run a container that is not root, and we change that, no container says root anymore, then they no longer mount the AWS token inside your container. So you have no access to the API. It's like so funny. And what's the hack? You have to add a file system group to the pod with a random number. And once you do that, it works. But yeah, anyway, I made that fix into customized controller. I've just set a file system group to the security context of the pod to fix it. Yeah, we definitely need to someone that has an Azure account should test out the decryption stuff, because I bet it doesn't work.
Do we have an issue for this?
What?
Do we have an issue for this?
There was an issue, and I think we closed it. I asked you to document.
I updated the documentation, but I didn't verify. I was more like, this is what you should probably look at. But either me or Simon can get around to verifying this probably in the coming weeks if we
can do it this or next week as soon as we get Flux up and running with Azure DevOps.
Yeah, we can do that. So
great.
We already have key vault and we have AD pod identity and all those things set up already.
Nice. I will create an issue in customized controller, and I will ping you on that.
Yeah, good.
The issue says just verify that whatever we wrote in the docs around Azure Vault is actually working for SOPs. Yeah. So I'm going to create a section for AWS KMS. We should have one for Azure Vault, and someone else figured out how to run it on GKE, and looks like GKE got it right. I mean, if you just bind the service account to the GKE Google Cloud KMS, it just works. So I'm not surprised. Google got it right, but anyway.
Right, another item. Stacey wanted me to mention that Lee's doing another GitOps deep dive talk on, it's the third in his series, looking at Flux v2. It's on November the 30th. There's a link in the agenda.
Nice. Yeah. Other things, we are moving the needle on multi-tenancy.
Yeah, actually, Jonathan, if you're here, you're muted and cameras off, so we don't know. But Jonathan made a comment on the multi-tenancy thing that I tried to answer, but may have gone completely astray. But he may not be here, so never mind.
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry.
Oh, no worries. Did
Yeah,
you?
I didn't have a chance to take a look yet.
Okay, no worries. We're sort of ending up. You responded to my proposal, but in fact, when I looked again, what I'd written ended up being more or less Stefan's proposal, but don't have a flag, which means no solution at all. But I quickly pivoted from that and suggested that maybe it would be better to have the secure by default way around, so that instead of having a flag which turns on isolation, you have a flag which turns it off, and it's there by default. Which ends up not being an answer to what you actually asked, but being sort of counter proposal, i.e. what Stefan's proposal said, but just with the flag the other way around. So it's a breaking change, but it does mean that it's secure unless you tell it not to be, rather than insecure unless you tell it not to be. Stefan may not agree with my characterization.
Is there going to be support for, I know there was a mention in Stefan's proposal about the support for extending access beyond just within the namespace itself for users. Is that going to still be something that comes with, I guess, this proposal?
What do you mean?
For instance, if you want to be able to, I guess, deploy to multiple namespaces outside of the original one, because I believe that was one of the.
Yeah, for sure. So we have a command in the CLI which is hidden because we don't want people to use it until we actually ship multi-tenancy across all controllers. And the CLI, Flux CLI has a command called create tenant. And when you do that, you can specify multiple namespaces. What it does, it creates a binding in each namespace to that particular user, or service account. So it's not also about namespaces. I mean, we are going to offer that CLI command, so you don't have to type in the role binding on your own. But if you want more than just giving people access to namespaces, let's say you decide for a particular tenant, a particular team, that team should have access to custom resource definitions, to install custom resource definition, to deploy controllers, right? You can actually extend that binding to a cluster role binding and say, hey, for that team, I give them rights to create custom resource definitions, but I don't give them rights to delete custom resource definition, right? In the end, it's Kubernetes RBAC. So whatever you can do with Kubernetes RBAC, you can bind it to a service account or a service, and Flux will just use that service, that account when it does the reconciliation. So we are not reinventing RBAC in any way. We want to rely on it. So yeah, I see no issues on. You can do whatever you want for a tenant. You can give it how much access you want. What we want to do is offer a CLI command so you can easily bootstrap a tenant instead of typing YAML. But if you want to do more complex stuff, you can do it from scratch. Another thing about multi-tenancy. So we have multi-tenancy support through service account impersonation right now in customized controller. And we stopped there because we wanted to validate our approach. That's why Helm controller has no, or the Helm release has no service account field. But once we have decided on the proposal, adding service account impersonation as the first step to Helm controller should be straightforward. We already have implemented kubeconfig support for Helm controller the same way it does for customized controller. So you can say, I want to install this Helm chart on a different cluster. So you tell it, hey, for this Helm release, use this kubeconfig and connect to the remote cluster and install it there. And so we can map to other identities in Helm controller. We just need to add a service account field in the custom resource and map it. Copy paste 10 lines of code from customized controller so it can load the token. That will be step one. Step two will be to allow people to specify users instead of service accounts. And I tried to explain on the issue why we want to offer two options for multi-tenancy is because once you have a service account in a namespace, then any pod that gets deployed in that namespace can run under that service account, right? That means, I don't know, we provision the service account in that particular namespace with full access to the namespace. Then you'll be deploying, I don't know, a Redis pod, and you can, inside the pod definition, you can say service account name, Flux reconciler. And there is nothing there to stop you unless you use, I don't know, OPA or some other thing that sits in front of KubeAPI and blocks such an identity theft, let's say. But with a Kubernetes user, where we have a fixed group, like, okay, we have the Flux or GOTK group, and then this is the user, you cannot run a pod under a user. You can only run a pod on a service account. So for highly restricted environments, using users is the best solution because no one can actually make use of that capability in their own apps. But I would also keep the service account for other reasons. For example, a service account has a cryptographic identity. So maybe you want to drive multi-tenancy in a way that each tenant has allocated a service account inside the cluster. Maybe you are already doing that. So we want to allow people that use service accounts to map tenants to be able to use Flux without having to rethink their whole tenancy approach. And the idea is once you use the user, we'll not check the service account, we'll not look at it. If the user is not there, only then we'll default to the service account. That's also something that Michael doesn't like because it's a hidden thing. Like, okay, if the user it is, you can place the service account there, we'll ignore it. But if the user doesn't exist, then we'll use the service account. I don't see another way for us to support both things, unless we add yet another magic flag to the Flux install command, which I'm reluctant to do. The more flags we'll add there, the harder it'll be to maintain, because we want people to be able to configure everything to custom resources and not install flags. So that's the trade-off.
Sorry, Stefan, I was just chasing down that discussion. I missed the last bit you were talking about, and then I heard my name and my ears pricked up. What were you saying that I don't like?
So what I'm proposing is to keep both service account impersonation and user impersonation throughout the toolkit controllers.
Yeah.
And if you say, hey, I'm installing Flux for multi-tenancy, maybe that's the default, maybe it's not.
Whichever way around, yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Let's say we have that flag. Once that flag is on for multi-tenancy, then the controllers will automatically look up for a user and will use a user no matter what. Even if you specify service account, it's there, it will be ignored.
Yeah,
right.
You're right. I don't like that.
If you don't have multi-tenancy enabled, then you can use service accounts and you can bind to those tenants' identities. And yeah, I'm not for removing service account, because service accounts in the future will be using them for KMS communication, for many other things. For example, when you set a service account on a customization, what happens right now is the controller will reconcile what's in that customization under that service account, but the decryption doesn't use the service account. In the future, it should use the service account, because that's the only way when you can bind to an IAM role from a cloud vendor to your actual workload, right? So, and there are many other cases for source controller as well. If you want to connect, let's say, to, I don't know, AWS Git repos. I have no idea how they are called anyway, cloud commit or something. You'll have an IAM role binding for a service account and so on. So most things are tied to service accounts. So yeah, I think we should.
I'm not against being able to impersonate service accounts. The thing, I don't know whether you're suggesting this or not, but the thing I'd be against is ignoring what people put in their manifests and using and defaulting to a user no matter what. So whatever they say. So because I don't think that's necessary. I think the thing that needs correction is defaulting to using the controller's service account. That's where the problem lies, isn't it? That if you don't say anything in your customization object, it'll use the controller's permissions. Am I right about that?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So the thing that needs fixing is what that default is, in my opinion, whichever way around the flag goes.
That default, no matter what is, it should be a cluster admin.
Sorry, say that again.
So that default will be cluster admin. Doesn't matter what it's, if it's a user or whatever it is, it will be cluster admin.
As things stand. What I'm saying is the problem is that you can just, as things stand, you can make a customization and not tell it to impersonate, and you get cluster admin permissions. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so that's the thing to fix, or at least one thing to fix. So one way of fixing that is to say, instead of the case where if it doesn't say anything, you use cluster admin. If it doesn't say anything, use a user in that same namespace.
Okay, and if it says use some service account?
And if it says use some service account, then use that service account. Or if it says some other user, then use that user, because that will still be in the same namespace. And so it will still, have whatever permissions that are limited to that namespace, or that have to have been bestowed by someone else.
A question there. Would we have this problem if the tenant doesn't have the ability to create their own Git repository custom resource, for example, that the fleet administrators does that for them, then that wouldn't be a problem, right? With the default option.
Yeah, if the person in charge of the whole thing can kind of onboard the tenant stuff, then they can control exactly what it gets permissions to. You're absolutely correct. And it can all live in the same namespace, so you would probably create a user, refer to a user and just give it permissions for the tenant namespace, and then create a sync that uses that user. So if you're if you're in control of all of it, there's kind of no problem, because you can do that as the
scenario I see for us at least is that we will be creating all the connections and all the Git repositories in a Flux system, and then we will just make sure that they can synchronize and they have access to their own Git repository, but they don't have access to the Fleet repository, for example.
Yeah, so what you said right now, we have full support for it. You will install the controllers with watch all namespace is false. That means even if they create Git repository and customization in their own namespace, nothing will act on it, right? They will not be able to create anything inside the Flux system namespace because they don't have kubectl cluster admin access to the cluster, right? And you will be onboarding their Git repos and their customizations. And from that moment on, what they will be doing, they will be driving deployments through their Git repo. Now, when you create that customization for a particular tenant, you'll also create a service account inside the Flux system namespace, which is binded to those namespaces. So that particular use case I had in mind when I first designed the impersonation in customized controller. What we are trying to achieve now is a different way of driving multi-tenancy, where you as a platform admin, you shouldn't be bothered with add this Git repo, please, to the cluster, create this customization for this particular directory, and so on. So let's say you want to say, hey, I'm going to give you a Git repo for each tenant, and in that repo, the tenants could declare other repositories, other customization, and so on. This is what we are trying to support now, a multi-tenancy model where the platform admin has, the platform admin role is just to onboard a single repo, and then it's up to the user to add their apps, add everything in there, right? So that's the whole discussion with the Kubernetes user that can be used by pods and so on. But in the first use case where you install it with watch all namespace is false and you create your own service account, then the actual user cannot do anything. That service account doesn't live in its namespaces. It's not there, it's in Flux system. And everything it adds to Git runs under that particular service account, so it cannot escape it. So yeah, that's covered. Yeah, going back to the service account discussion, Michael. I guess you're not aware how customized controller does it. Customized controller can impersonate service accounts in any namespace.
I don't think that's a good idea.
Okay.
Because, doesn't that just mean if you can create a customization, then you can get cluster admin? Because you just name the service account in the Flux system namespace.
But isn't that applied for the Flux system namespace itself? The customizations will be there, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, but in the kind of expanded scenario where you're giving people permission to put customizations and so on, but you're trying to limit what they can do with them. If you can just name any service account in any namespace, then they're free to just name the cluster admin.
Okay, so now you understand why in my proposal I'm saying.
Why do you want people to be able to do that? That seems like a massive security hole.
What do you mean?
Why do you want people to be able to name service accounts in other namespaces?
Because you're the cluster admin and you should be able to do that.
But what if you're not the cluster admin?
If you're not the cluster admin, that's what I said in my proposal. If you're not the cluster admin and you create a customization in your own namespace, whatever you tell it in the service account, it will be completely ignored and it uses the Kubernetes user.
Yeah, okay. But if you're the cluster admin, why do you need to, I still don't see why you need to refer to service accounts elsewhere. Either why is the service account not just in whatever namespace you're keeping for yourself?
So the setups I've seen are like that. The cluster admin creates namespaces and a service account in one of those namespaces that defines the tenant. Then you install the Flux with watch on namespace is false. That means you have to create the customizations in the Flux system namespace. But in that namespace, there is no service account. The tenant service accounts are in other namespaces. So you as a cluster admin, you can say this customization here will impersonate the service account from that namespace because that's the tenant.
Right, but why does that service account have to be in the other namespace?
Because that's how people do it. I don't know.
Okay, well, it just seems like a really bit of a disaster, to be quite honest.
Why?
Because I mean, for the same reason that can you start a pod which names a service account in another namespace? I don't think so, right? So
No.
for the same reason, you shouldn't be able to do that with a customization. You shouldn't be able to impersonate users that aren't available to you otherwise.
They are available because the customized controller runs with cluster admin. Yeah, okay, this never-ending discussion. Okay, we can make a proposal to remove the namespace.
Yeah, sorry, that hasn't sort of come up, or at least not explicitly in that discussion. So I'll bring it up as a particular point.
I think I've mentioned it like 10 times now, but okay.
Not in that discussion because I just read it through again today. It's not explicitly mentioned. We're just past the hour. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
PRs.